Good evening and welcome back to using graphics and web pages. So let's take a look at our HTML document. First off, notice that I have completely changed this document from an XHTML 1.0 document to an HTML5 document. So if you have not had the opportunity to do that yet, why don't you pause the video right here and go ahead and make that change. Okay, welcome back. So I'm assuming at this point that the top portion of your HTML code resembles mine. As you can see, the doc type is an HTML5 doc type, and we have got the title, and we've already got a link to our style sheet. The style sheet is open right here. We haven't made any changes. Let's take a look at our page in a browser. And you can see that this is what it looks like. Nothing terribly exciting. We're going to do a couple of bits of just minor formatting to start off with. I'm going to take a look at the HTML so that I can get an idea of the structure of the site. I start off by clicking on this div with an ID of content, and here in Notepad++, when I click on one div, it highlights the closing tag for that div. So I can see that the content div has everything in it except for the footer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a rule, and I'm going to make both of these 1000 pixels wide, and I'm also going to give them a top and bottom margin of 0 and a left and right margin of auto. You should remember from last week's lecture that what this will do is center those divs in the page. And sure enough, when we go back and refresh, we can see now that the content at the top of the page has scooted over, but where it becomes more evident what's happening is by looking at the bottom where there's actually text that spans the width of the page. And you can see now that it's gotten fairly equal margins on the left and the right hand side, and that the content as a result is kind of lined up in the center of the page. Great. So that's one little thing that we've taken care of. Another thing that I want to look at is I'd like to take a look at these images that we've got. So we're going to scoot up here first of all to the top and to the bottom here, and we'll see that we've got a bunch of different pictures. Now when it comes to formatting pictures, it might be really tempting to create rules for all of the pictures on your website. So let's just do that right now. Let's just say that we want every image to be formatted in the same way. Well, let's start talking about what properties exist for images. It just so happens that there aren't any truly special properties specifically for images. Images are boxes, and as a result they follow the box model. So the box model is all we would really apply to them. We would apply borders, paddings, margins. We would apply float. In the case of some of these images, like if you look at the very top, those images that are part of the gallery, they're actually part of an unordered list with an ID of gallery. That'll become important in a little bit. But what we're going to do right now is we're just going to say that we want all of our images to float left, and let's say that we want them to have padding, and the padding on the top, we're going to say we want it to be 10 pixels, and we're going to say that we also want it to be 10 pixels on the left and right, but that we want 50 pixels on the bottom. Great. And last but not least, we're going to give all of them a border, and the border is going to be 1 pixel. It's going to be, let's say, dashed, just to keep things interesting, and let's make it kind of a light gray. Okay, so let's see what that does. We've just created a rule that is for every single image on our web page. So you can see that what that's done is that's given us this sort of look for all of our pictures. So these look kind of like Polaroids, and there's still some tweaking we need to do there, and we'll take a look at that in just a minute. But we can see that we get a kind of similar look. We're going to want to do some stuff in terms of allowing some additional white space between the pictures and the elements around it. So let's just go ahead and give images a right margin of 10 pixels, and let's see what that ends up doing for us. So when we do that, that gives us a little bit more white space on the outside of our images. All right, so there's a couple of funky things that are still happening here that we're going to want to target. For instance, right now these images, well, really the padding's kind of large on these images given what we're looking at. So we're not necessarily going to want to apply the same formatting to every image. We might want to do some special formatting here. I think that the formatting on the top and the left and right are probably okay. It's the padding on the bottom that's a little big. Plus we're still dealing with this whole bulleted list thing, and the subheading, because of the way floats work, is coming up and taking up space to the right of the last floated element. So let's take a look at our HTML code and see how we can fix those problems. One thing we can do is, we already knew that that unordered list had an ID of gallery, so we're going to create a rule for gallery, and we're going to say that we want the list style to be none. And that's going to really help a lot right there. So let's take a look at what that does. And as you can see, what that does is that lines all of these images up one next to the other, exactly the way we wanted them to be. Awesome. Let's get this subheading down near where it needs to be. So let's take a look real quickly at our HTML, and we can see that the H2 element, where it says subheading, right below the gallery, has a class of ClearFix. And I'd sort of mentioned this class to you in the past as a kind of a hack that is often used in order to deal with clearing floats. So we're just going to say clear both, because at any point we might decide that we want to change the direction of the float. So rather than having to come in and change that, or rather what this does is this allows us to use this class of ClearFix on really any element regardless of how the items before it were floated. So I'm going to refresh it, and now you can see that what that does is that bumps the subheading. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the bottom padding's a little thick on these items. So let's come back in here, and what we're going to say here is gallery image. So we're going to use a descendant selector. We're going to be really specific about which images we're talking about. And we like everything else. What we don't like is the bottom padding. So what we can do is, as opposed to having to write a whole new property value setting for padding, overriding everything, we can just specify that we want the bottom padding to only be 10 pixels, and everything else will be just grand. So if we do that, there we go. So as you can see, what that's done is that allows these items to have a more square padding, but allows us to keep the sort of Polaroid looking padding for this larger image, which works just fine on the larger image. All right, so we've got kind of an idea of how we can format just individual images, both by targeting the IMG tag and by targeting very, very specific images. Generally speaking, when you're dealing with images, 9 times out of 10, you are probably going to be looking at using a descendant selector. So I'd say just start off by thinking about what things you want in common for most of your pictures, and then start using descendant selectors to be a little bit more specific and target the differences. That is really all there is to using an image tag. We'll take a quick look at the CSS one more time. You can see that we have got our content footer. We've given them a width and a margin of 0 and auto. That centers them on the page. We floated all of our images to the left, and we did padding. The padding is what has resulted in that white space between the actual image and the border. And then we've got our border, and we've got a right margin, which gives us white space between each individual image and its border. There are a couple of other things that we could do as well. I could, for instance, make the opacity about halfway on a gallery image, but then I could also, one of those things that people sometimes forget we can do is you can apply hover to pretty much any element as well. It doesn't enjoy universal browser support, so be aware of that. But certainly it's something that we can do using most modern browsers. So what I've done here is I've applied an opacity of 0.5 to the gallery images specifically when they're just sitting there, but when you hover over them, they should fill in and have an opacity of 1. So we're just going to refresh this page, and you can see that that kind of fades the images out, but when you hover over them, it increases the opacity. Now understand that moving forward, probably with chapter 9 in fact, we're going to start looking at interesting ways of creating navigation. And that's going to involve using background images and such, and that's going to shift what we're doing a little bit. So don't allow yourself to get confused by what we've done here and by some of what we're going to do later. But be aware that this is a way that you can create really visually interesting photo galleries and such. That is all there is for working with the image tag. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to bring them up in class next week. Otherwise, stay tuned for the next video, which is going to talk a little bit more about using background images, and that'll probably take us 2 videos. Talk to you soon.